What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Java tutorial. In today's video we will be talking about variables. By the end of the video we should have covered the basic definition of variables. We should know why we even need variables in our programs, and also we should talk about the concept of data types and variable declaration, and then finally variable initialization and assignment. So let's get started. So, welcome back. First things first, what is a variable? A variable is a container in computer memory where you store your program's data. What does this mean? Inside your computer, you should be concerned about two things right now: the CPU and the RAM. The CPU is the brain of your computer. Every calculation that happens inside the computer is done by the CPU. So when you write your program, it will be run by the CPU. Now, here's the thing. Even though the CPU runs the code, it doesn't store the data it's working with. Instead, this other thing called the RAM or memory stores all the data the CPU is working with. So when you give data to your program, it has to be stored in the memory first before the CPU can take it and use it. Now, why am I talking about CPU and RAM? Here's the reason. When you create a variable inside your program, it reserves a location in the computer memory so that some value can be stored there. For example, you can say something like, hey computer, find some free space in your memory and call that place age. Now later on in the same program, you can also say something like, hey computer, you see that place in memory called age, put the value 21 there. Now I know code isn't written like this, but you get the point. This picture in the slide demonstrates what I've just said. Both the code and data are stored in the RAM as the computer executes the program. It is not a thing that the code or data is stored inside the CPU itself. At this point, I find it important to explain the difference between variables and actual data values, because that will help us understand the main essence of variables. Let's do this with an example. Say we are writing a program about a person. Here are some of the data we might be working with: the person's name, age, gender, etc. In this illustration, I have two series of boxes. The first one representing variables inside code, and the second one representing actual data values inside computer memory or RAM. Now, inside the memory, the actual values we might store are Nick, 21, and male, because ultimately that's what the computer uses when running the code. But also, we want to be able to refer to those memory locations inside our code so that we can even put some data values there in the first place, or maybe set them to new values later. So here is the takeaway from the slide. The variables are the names we use in the code to mark locations in the memory, and the values are the actual data that's stored in the memory. So in this case, we use variable names such as name, age, gender as references to memory locations where data values such as Nick, 21, and male are stored respectively. Now, why do we need variables? First off, to give meaning to data. I know it is obvious by now that variables help us understand data. Let's reconsider when we used the variable age in our code to mark the memory space where the value 21 was stored. That meant that we understood that 21 is someone's age. Now let's assume that we are able to read code written by someone else. In that code, if the programmer simply puts 21 where he wanted to show someone's age, unless he tells us or includes a comment to describe the code, we won't be able to discern that that's someone's age, of course. Also, variables let us refer back to data and change or use it. Another good thing about using variables is that once we create them, we're able to refer back to the same data and maybe change it whenever required. Now, there are other reasons, to use variables, but for now, these are the main ones you need to know in order to understand variables. Now, let's consider the topic of data types. When we create a variable, we have to tell the computer what type of data the variable will contain. A data type is a word we associate with a variable so that the computer knows what type of data it will be storing in memory for that variable. In this picture below, you see that the name Nick is made up of the characters of the alphabet. Age, as you know, is usually counted as the number of years, and the variable weight can also be represented as a decimal number in pounds. It is therefore said that the variable name is of different data type than age, and both name and age are of different data types than the variable weight. Now, so here are some of the reasons why we use data types with variables. A data type helps the computer understand what type of data is stored in memory. As an example, a person's age is a number, but their name is made up of letters of the alphabet. Also, a data type helps the computer know what it can or cannot do with the data. As an example, the computer knows that it can multiply numbers, but it also knows that multiplication is not a possibility with letters of the alphabet. Another importance of data types that I haven't included on this slide is that variables help the computer to know how much memory space is needed in order to store the data. Every data you store in the computer must take up some amount of memory storage. But here is one important thing to know. All data do not use the same amount of memory. For example, a number such as 10 will need less amount of space than, say, a person's first name such as Theodore. Now, there is much more in-depth meaning to this point, which is why I decided to not show it on the slide. I know that most of you guys watching this video are absolute beginners, and this particular point can take us as far as understanding bits and bytes. How bits and bytes work, and that in itself is a topic of a whole discussion. But at the very least, for now, just know that when we tell the computer that we want to store some data, we must also tell the computer the type of data that is. So before we proceed to the NetBeans IDE to write some code, I thought that I show you some examples of data types. First of which is the integer type, which is mostly represented with the keyword int in programming, and some of the values for that particular data type is 34 whole numbers, 34, 35, 1, something like that. Character is used for storing character data, example A. Boolean can also be used to store true or false values. With Boolean data types, there is a lot more we can talk about in order to understand that data type. But for now, just know that it stores true or false values. Another data type is what's called a string. So here's the thing about strings and characters. With char, it's just a single character, but a string could be made up of a sequence of characters. So a name is a string because it contains 2 or more characters, right? But something like grade, school grade can be measured as just can be represented with just a character such as A. So let's talk about the next one, which is double. It is also a data type in Java for storing decimal numbers, and an example could be 23.5, etc. So now let's go to NetBeans to understand variable declaration, initialization, and assignment. So we're now in NetBeans IDE, and we are going to be writing some code. In this IDE, we will demonstrate 2 things, which are first variable declaration, and then we move on to variable assignment and initialization. So before you can put a variable in your code, these are 3 things you have to do. First of all, you have to specify the type of data, which is known as the data type. And also we have to specify the name of the variable. And then after we've provided these information, we can go ahead and assign values to the variable. So here's how you do it. First of all, let me type out these 3 variables, and then we will analyze them. So we'll do the first one being string as the data type, and first name as the variable name, and then the second one char being the data type, and then first name initial being the variable name, and then we'll do the next one being int as the data type, and then age as the name. Then last. So now with first name being of type string, we can store a sequence of characters. With first name initial being of type char, we can store a character such as M, and also with age being of type int, we can store a number such as 22. And finally, with Ismail being of type Boolean, we can store values such as true or false. So now the process of putting the value inside the variable is what's called assignment, and here's how we do that. We simply take the variable's name, like first name, and then we do that name equals the value, such as Muhammad. So with character, we also take the variable's name, which is the first name initial, and then do that name equals the value. Now here is something Here's the thing about strings and characters. You notice that before we typed out the value for a string variable, we used double quotes. We had to put the value inside of double quotes. That is just a syntactical way of doing it. If you do it otherwise, you're going to get an error. The Java compiler expects that before you put a string value, you have to enclose it in a pair of double quotes. Character, on the other hand, uses just a single quote. But if you try to put more than one characters in that pair of single quotes, you're gonna get an error. So that is just the Java way of representing strings and characters. So with age, However, since we've declared that to be of type int, we can just do the age variable name equals just any number, maybe 32, maybe 27. Now, this is perfectly acceptable in Java code. You don't have to put a number inside of any pair of quotes or any pair of single quotes. The thing is that the compiler is able to recognize the number just as it is, as a number, and be able to work with it. So with isMale as being of Boolean type, we can also do something as simple as isMale equals true, or we can even change that to false. And the compiler also recognizes Boolean values as is. You don't have to put them in any pair of single or double quotes. It just recognizes it, and that's how the compiler works. So far we've covered variable declaration and assignment. The first part of which we did string first name, char first name initial, int age, and Boolean isMale are all variable declarations. It is just a process of stating the data type and the variable name. That is what's referred to as the variable declaration. Now, variable assignment or assignment of value to the variable comes from this equal to keyword. Now, in arithmetic, the equal to operator means equality, but in Java programming, that is not the case. You use the equal to operator as what's called the assignment operator. So what this means is that this variable first name, put the value Muhammad there. This variable first name initial, put the value A there. This variable age, put the value 27 there. You get the point. So now, what is then variable initialization? So this is just a way to show programmers that it is possible that you declare the variable and assign a value to it right at the spot when you declared the variable. So for example, with the first name variable declaration, we could have done something like string first name equals, then we assign a value right over there. So that's valid in programming, and this way of doing it is called the variable initialization. So I have a paragraph here which I have entitled Eric and his age. So just so you know, we have this repeated down here because this area down here is the output of the program. So when we run the program, that's what we get as the output. So up here, that's the code itself. That's where we're going to modify stuff, and then when we run it, we should expect to see what we expect to see in the console, which is down here as the output. So I am going to change the paragraph so that I fill in the information, so we have something that makes a lot of sense. And then after I do that, we are going to see how variables help us make programming easy in a use case such as this one. So after filling in the gaps, we have something that reads like, there was a young man called Eric. He liked being called Eric, but his friends called him Erico. I mean, I'm not going to read the whole thing because you can read it by yourself. So now when we run it, we should get the same output down here. Now think about it. What could be the problem with this particular paragraph? You see that we have repeated Eric so many times, and also we've done that for the age 27 so many times. So if, for example, we wanted to talk about some different person called maybe Steve, and then Steve was maybe 22 years old. What that meant is that we have to go through everything and then change the name to Steve, and then also the age to 24. So that for this particular paragraph, it wouldn't be so much to do because we have just so much text. But what about if you have a huge program that has so much repetition of the same text that you have to put in the program, that you have to edit to change in the program? That becomes very tedious to do. So this is where variables come in. With variables, what we do is that we put in a placeholder variable names in the text. So that way the actual paragraph can remain the same, and if we needed to change the character and his age, we just go back to where we declared the variables and then change the values. So that way, anytime we have to come back and change stuff, we don't have to do it through the entire paragraph. But then we go back to where we declared the variables and then change the values. So I'll demonstrate that in a bit. But for now, let me reformat the code so that it looks suitable for that. So what I've done now is that I've declared two variables. The first one being of type string, and then the variable name being person name, and then the value I've assigned to that is Eric. Down here I have another variable of type int, and its name being person age, and then I've assigned a value of 27. So in the paragraph here, you'll notice that wherever I needed to put Eric, I put person name, and then wherever I needed to put his age, I put person age. So now when I run it, you see that we still get the same output, despite the fact that we have something that reads like, there was a young man called person name, he liked being called person name, blah blah blah. So before I proceed, I'd like to talk a little bit about the syntax we have here. Whenever you wanted to, or you have to insert a variable in a string, you have to do what's called the string concatenation. What that means is that you have to just include a plus sign. First of all, you have to break out of the string by closing it off, and then you put in you add a plus sign and then the variable name. This might not be familiar to you now, but for now just know that we have to step outside of the string to be able to put the variable name. That way the compiler can recognize this as not just any text in the main string, but something that has been declared outside of the string. So you just So the benefits of having this structure here is that we are able to use the power of variables to make the program much easier to modify. So if now we don't want to talk about Eric, we want to talk about Steve, all we have to do is that we come up here where the variables were declared, and then we just do something like string person name equals Steve. And then if Steve is not 27 and he's 24, we just come up here and modify that to 24. Now when we run the code, you realize that we have, there was a young man called Steve. He liked being called Steve, blah, blah, blah. So with this leveraging of the power of variables, we, as I've said, changed the values just in one place, and then it kind of affected the entire paragraph. If that wasn't the case, then in order to switch from Eric to Steve, then that would have meant that we will come back in the paragraph, and wherever we had Eric, we put Steve there, and wherever we had Eric's age, we have to change that to Steve's age. So that is just to demonstrate how variables can help us make our lives as programmers easy. So this does it for us on the video about variables. If you like the content, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.